October supposed to be out?
Ready? All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you guys so much for attending my end of summer presentation. My name is Manny Campuzano. I am going into my junior year at Drake University, where I'm majoring in actuarial science and minoring in data analytics. And I had the privilege to be working on Principal's international team this summer. And before I start, I just want to say that this was my first ever real-world job experience, and I don't think Principal could have done a better job with treating their interns. I think this experience has just been so amazing for me, learning about the real world, kind of like what the corporate world really does, and it's just been so much fun here, and I'm really glad that I got the opportunity to work here at Principal. So a quick overview of my presentation. I'm first going to give a little bit of background so that you guys have at least an idea of what I'm talking about, and then I'm going to kind of blend that into what I did for my project, and then I'll actually show you guys some examples that I did with my project with some screenshots that I took. So, like I just said, I was on the international team, and because of that, my team had to work with a lot of different places around the world, and this included places like Chile and Brazil and Hong Kong, and the country that I worked with from this project was Brazil. And in Brazil, there is an insurance company called Brasilprev, and they sell multiple different types of retirement pension products, and Principal helps sell these products. And 75% of Brasilprev is owned by Banco de Brazil, which is actually Brazil's largest bank. And then the other 25% is owned by Principal. And like I said, these include some accumulation products, and these all start as deferred annuities. And these deferred annuities is where customers make payments towards Brasilprev, and then Brasilprev takes those payments and then invests them. And then once that person reaches their retirement age, they have two options. They either have the option to get this money back as a single lump sum payment, or to turn this into a payout annuity. And these payout annuities, obviously this is where the customer gets their payments back in the form of benefits, and this is what my project kind of focused on. And just a quick side note here, any number that you see in this presentation is going to be in the form of the Brazilian currency, called the Brazilian reais, and I think the conversion rate right now is about 5 to 1, so if you see like 100 reais, that would be around $20 in USD. So, with these payout annuities, obviously we give these benefits back to the customers, and in order to do that, we need to hold a reserve. We need to hold a payout reserve. And this reserve changes between month to month, and there are a lot of different things that go into this reserve change. And these include interest accrual, benefits paid to the customers, new issuances of new policies, and discount rates. However, there is one last aspect here, which is called the ATE variance that affects the reserve change. And you may be wondering what this is, and all this is what the actual reserve change was from month to month compared to what the expected reserve change was from month to month. Hence the name ATE variance is the difference between the actual and the expected reserve change. And for my project, I found this ATE variance and I was able to look at it more in depth between the months of March and April. And there are two main things that go into this ATE variance, which is mortality and inflation. And calculating these two aspects is pretty much what my project was. It was an analysis on the monthly reserve change from March to April, and it was based on this payout annuity block of the population. And these two things are very important because with mortality, obviously with these payout annuities, we keep making these payments until a person dies, and once that person dies, then that reserve gets released due to mortality. And then also with inflation, inflation is especially important because usually we wouldn't have to worry about inflation if we were dealing with a payout annuity here in the States, because these benefit amounts that we give back to the customers in the States, they remain constant over the course until they die. However, it's a little bit different in Brazil, because with Brazil, we have to account for the inflation for these benefit amounts. So inflation actually affects these benefit amounts, and we have to credit that inflation towards that reserve change in the policies. And then I'm going to quickly talk about some of the benefits of a project before I show you the screenshots, so you have a better understanding of the screenshots. So the main benefit of my tool that I made, which is in Power BI, is that it gives us a really in-depth look at this ATE variance. So what my team did before was that they would calculate this ATE variance and kind of just look at it as a whole. Like they wouldn't be able to really get into depth about it. Like they wouldn't be able to see how much of it was due to inflation and how much of it was due to mortality. However, with my tool, which you'll see here soon, we're actually able to see how much of that mortality goes to the ATE variance and how much of that inflation goes into the ATE variance. So we're actually able to get a detailed look at what goes into this ATE variance. And then the other main benefit is that with my tool, we'll be able to really drill into the data and find specific policies or kind of irregularities within the data that we could take a look at and further investigate to see if there was like something wrong or if it was something that was unexpected and that we had to change some of our assumptions. So now I'll actually pull up my screenshot of what I did in Power BI. So I kind of divided it up here into some steps. So this first step here is that you can select an issue year that you want to focus on, and then the next step is that you can choose some characteristics that you want to organize it by, which include gender, and age, and annuity type. And I'll get into those inflation indices a little bit later when I talk about inflation. And then lastly, we're able to view our expected and actual reserve changes from March to April. So as you can see here, this actual reserve change was around 7.8 million HAIs, and then the expected reserve change was 3 million HAIs. And so like I said, that ATE variance is the difference between the actual and the expected. So the difference between these two numbers is what actually goes into that ATE variance part of that reserve change. And because the expected is less than the actual, this would actually cause a decrease in that total ATE variance. And then this next screenshot is actually me showing some examples of me utilizing the tool. So I selected the year 2013 and then selected the annuity type of straight life. And then here you can see all of the groups of policies that follow those specific characteristics. And then I actually found that this group of policies at the top that says 1.7 million HAIs, that was a lot more than any of the other groups of policies. And so in this case, this would be something that my group would have to investigate and see if there was maybe a higher mortality in those specific areas than usual. And maybe we would have to do like a change of assumptions here due to this number being a lot higher than all of the other ones. And yeah, this tool just like allows us to really dig deep into this data and see if there were any major concerns or if there are any numbers that were larger than usual. And then again, this is the inflation tool. Pretty much the same thing. You start with selecting a year, and then you go into all your other characteristics. And then now I'll talk about those inflation indices. So here in the US, we really only follow one inflation index. However, in Brazil, there's actually 3 different inflation indices that you could follow. And the policies in this group or population, the payout annuities are actually tied to these different inflation indices, which is why we have to take them into account. So one policy could be under that inflation index of IGPM, and then another policy could be under one of the other two. And then again, this last step here, it shows that total reserve impact based or solely due to inflation. And the reason why I don't have an expected versus an actual here is because we set that expected inflation amount equal to 0, and then this would be the actual reserve change, and we set that equal to 0 because we just want to isolate how much of an effect that only inflation had on our reserve change, which is why we set it equal to 0. And then again, with me, another example here, I select the year 2009, I select the annuity type straight life, and then I select the inflation index of IPCA, and then here you can view the total reserve impact that it had based on this change from March to April, based on these given characteristics. And again, you can select any of the years or gender or plan or age, and you can see how much of a reserve impact that had on the total reserve change from March to April. And lastly, I'm gonna go over some next steps and challenges that I faced. So the next step, the main one would be, so I did this project from March to April, and if I had more time here, I only had the summer, but if I had more time, then I would want to be able to make this tool be able to calculate this difference between all months and not just March to April. And I'll find a way to kind of code that out and then be able to implement that for any 2 months throughout the year. And then the other thing was I was going to repeat this process, a very similar process, except do it with a company in Chile. And I think that's what I'll be working on these last couple of weeks here before we all have to head back. And then some challenges that I faced was learning some new software. Some of those reserve amounts were calculated through MG Alpha. I never used MG Alpha before, so it was definitely a new experience. MG Alpha was very hard to understand at first, but my leader kind of guided me through the basics of it, and then it led me to be able to complete this project. And then again, Power BI, I had never worked in Power BI before, but that was a little bit easy to learn than MG Alpha, and that's why I was able to make that tool in Power BI. And then lastly, there was some R coding. I had taken a class at Drake that was an intro to R and SAS, and so I kind of had like a basic understanding of R, but some of those calculations that I made using R were just really advanced, so I had to take some time to do some like individual learning and kind of just know what code to use for that, and that was challenging. That took up a little bit of my time here, but now I'm much more informed about all three of these softwares that we use, and that is pretty much my project, so I'll leave it open to any questions that you guys have.
You mentioned the actual to expected variance analysis on the mortality. As you dug deeper, was there anything that you guys found that was interesting or surprising, different than what you expected?
Yeah, so like if we go back to this first one right here, so that 1.7 million there, that was a little bit higher than what we expected it to be. And I'm also working on, so this expected reserve change, I didn't have enough time to do it, but this is also supposed to be a table that shows the expected reserve change for all of these amounts too. And the expected one for this one was a lot lower than that 1.7 million. And so that was definitely something that we looked at and that we had to go back into Excel because that's where like all the original data is from. And so we had to kind of like dig back through there and see like kind of what was happening with the policies and whether it was like a data error or if there was actually like more people dying than usual for that specific group of policies. Do you want to?
My question. Question?
Yep.
So you said in the bottom table there, rightmost column is your variance, correct?
This one, like right here.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's the actual reserve change due to mortality based on these characteristics that I've selected in Power BI.
Okay. Reserve change compared to prior period, right?
Yeah.
And so, is there? Would it be beneficial to, in addition to that column, show the change, average change per contract?
Yeah. So like I said before, that was like something that that was like the final piece of this project that I needed was to add like this expected reserve change and kind of like make that into a table similar to this. And then I was going to incorporate that kind of like at the very end here, where it's like the difference between like the actual and then the expected, and then have those differences in between there.
Yeah. So I guess my question is, if you have a cohort listed there that's 1,000 times bigger than any other cohort, right? It stands to reason that your variances might be larger.
Yeah.
There, right? And so potentially there could be some advantage of maybe per contract metrics in there.
Yeah.
Additional.
I wanted to point out that this is a very well done way of showing the Power BI dashboard. I enjoyed this more than most that I see sometimes come from the PowerPoint, so that's good. But I also was curious what causes the inflation index to vary by policies. Is this like when the year they were issued?
Yeah. So like it's kind of hard to explain, but like I said before, like each policy is kind of tied to a different inflation index, and that kind of I think that's like based on like the year that it was assigned, and it's just I'm not too familiar with it. All I know is that like some policies are tied to different inflation indices. I don't know like the full reasons why behind that, but
Thanks.
yep.